Good afternoon, everyone. This is Patsy Sweeney from NERCA, and I want to welcome you to our DOT Compliance, Safety, and Accountability webinar. During the presentation, everyone will be muted. We will open it up for questions when the presentation is done. Or you can put your, there's a block where you can write your questions, and then Bruce can answer it after the presentation. I'd like to introduce our speaker, Bruce Lawler from Contractor Risk Management. Bruce is a former New Hampshire State Trooper and is now a DOT Compliance and Training Specialist with Contractor Risk Management. Bruce, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Patsy. Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to run into exactly what this CSA program is all about, and it stands for Compliance, Safety, Accountability. And just a little bit of history behind this. The Department of Transportation, otherwise known as DOT, enacted the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration in January of 2000. And the way motor carriers were judged as far as their safety scores go was based strictly on out-of-service criteria for roadside inspections, drug and alcohol activities, and crash awareness indicators. During the President Obama presidential programs, he put together what's called MAP 21, Moving Ahead in Progress in the 21st Century, and this all started to meld with that. So the FMCSA, or acronym again, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, found it in their wise wisdoms to stop judging motor carriers based on their out-of-service criteria, which means if you pull into a roadside inspection or you get stopped for a moving violation, you were only judged in a negative way based on if you were placed out of service, and there were only 4 criteria that you were judged on, and they were hazardous materials, security, the driver fitness, and driver wellness. After a while, motor carriers that only had 1, 2, 3, 10 commercial motor vehicles were judged on the same criteria as a motor carrier that, say, had 100 or 200 vehicles. And the people who had the most inspections clearly were easier to fall prey to the out-of-service criteria. Therefore, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration created the CSA program. And so you're looking at the main screen right here, and again, the CSA, exactly what is it? Well, CSA is based on what's called basics, BASIC, and there are 7 categories that make up the CSA program. And it's a much wider realm of criteria that you're being judged on as opposed to just the out-of-service ones. You're also held accountable for your warnings, your out-of-service, your motor vehicle moving violations, as well as a realm of other issues that can happen on the road. So let's break this down a little bit. They're called behavior, analysis, and safety improvement categories, basic, and they are unsafe driver, driver fitness, crash indicator, hours of service, hazardous materials, and vehicle maintenance, which is the big one. We'll get into that in detail shortly. And controlled substance, which is drug and alcohol testing, which includes pre-employment drug screening, random drug screening, and testing post-accident, if applicable. So the MCMIS, or acronym for Motor Carrier Management Information System, will review and identify any trouble categories. So I ask you if anybody is familiar with your scores, and I'm going to explain to you how you can do this on your own with a few simple steps right online. So the MCMIS is a 7-step program where it can give you what's called the SMS, which is the Safety Management System safety score. It is updated daily through the website and provides 6 years of history on everything that you have to do with relating to these 7 basics. So let's break these down a little bit. Get that back. Here's the website. This is something that most of you may or will want to write down. If not, you can call me and I'll be happy to provide the website for you after the presentation. But the website is fmcsa.gov. dot.gov. And what happens is, once the main picture comes up, the main page comes up, you're going to see a bar on the right-hand side about a quarter of the way down, and it's going to say search U.S. DOT number or company name. Right next to that is going to be an enter button. Just click it without putting anything in the bar. And then your next page is going to come up, and you're going to be seeing a notice that flashes on the screen. X out of it, there's going to be an X. You just click on it, and then scroll down a little bit to the left-hand side, and you're going to see a information bar that says check motor carrier safety and performance data. That's where you want to enter your DOT number. And you plug that in, hit enter, and you're going to be seeing your company's name and all types of vital information that pops up when you submit your MCS 150 form. That's the biannual form that's required to be submitted to the Fed. And it provides any updates, pro or con, relative to your fleet size, drivers, and so on, what it is you haul. And what happens is you're going to, on the left-hand side, you scroll down a little bit further, and on the bar, you're going to see something that says complete SMS profile. If you click that and give it about a second, start scrolling down, you're going to see all types of information that's a really good working tool for human resources and motor carrier management for your company. It provides violation summary on everything that's happened, from moving violations to warnings that have happened to out of service issues, any type of thing that's happened on the road, both moving, again, being stopped or pulling into a roadside. In addition, it provides you with inspection history, which is extremely important, because what that does is it provides the date, location, and the truck number and the trooper's name who was involved in with the inspection data, again, whether it was a roadside inspection or getting stopped for a moving violation, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And it also provides you with crash activity. And crash activity is one of the most delicate entries that have to be on there. And if you see something that's not correct or inaccurate, you really want to contact the FMCSA with the contact number they have it on the main frame, on the main page. And there's a process called a data cube challenge. And what you do is you provide information to the Fed that's contrary or correct, but contrary to what their entry is. And a good portion of the time, I've done about 60 of those in the course of the last 12 years. And I have about a 50-50 success ratio. So they do pay really good attention to that. So that's the website, again, fmcsa.dot.gov. And it's an excellent tool, and I think it's easily navigatable as far as how you get around the site. So moving forward, we're going to break down the 7 basics we were talking about, and we'll start with the unsafe driving basic. And this is simply driving in a dangerous or careless manner. And examples that we provide here are speeding, reckless driving, unsafe lane change, improper lane change, following too close, inattention, which is huge right now, which is distracted driving, no seat belts, again, the speeding violations. And I want to break down a little bit about the discussion on what a serious violation is. A serious violation in the eyes of the FMCSA would be, give you a speeding example. They break them down from 1 to 4, 5 to 9, and 10 to 15 miles per hour over the posted limit. Anytime that a vehicle, truck, that falls under the DOT regulations is stopped for a speeding violation, they'll fall within one of those 3 categories. Any speeding violation that is 14 miles per hour, well, above 14 miles per hour, 15 or higher, becomes a serious violation. Now you sit back and think about that for a moment, and you're talking about 70 and a 55, 50 and a 35, and in some places in New Hampshire and Maine, the speed limit rises to 70 up to 80. And so anything you hit from 15 miles per hour over becomes a serious violation. That includes, again, the following too close, unsafe lane change, which is coming in and off of a highway by way of an exit. And in Massachusetts and Connecticut, they've actually even raised the envelope to riding in the high-speed lane in a commercial vehicle, which is prohibited. If it's a 4-lane highway, similar to 95, and 128, it's actually the far 2 lanes to the right. And you'll see signs on the highway that prohibit, it says trucks, but they're talking about commercial vehicles from traveling in those lanes. The fines are extremely steep, and the issue with you folks as a motor carrier is the driver, him or herself, now has their very own commercial vehicle, motor vehicle history record. And any violation that is applicable to the driver now falls on the motor carrier. And that goes a long ways. So the driver carries these scores for 3 years, and the motor carrier carries these for 2 years. And each one of these basics have a intervention level, which falls into a percentile, whether it's like unsafe driving is 65%, and the 70-75% depending on the criteria. What happens is once you're scored, and that depends on how many violations you get, including warnings. Once you fall above the national average, that's not really a yellow light, but it's flags at the FMCSA office in Washington, D.C. When 2 of those rise above the national average, typically what will happen is they'll start looking for patterns of violations. Patterns can be consistencies with drivers, or a single driver that's got bad habits, or a culture issue with the company. And if the motor carrier has an unsafe culture, then needless to say, that can come back to bite you pretty bad. And shortly, we're going to be talking about the intervention levels and what to expect in the event that you start getting the warning letters. So next, we're going to get into hazardous material. I understand that the roofing community may have occasion to haul heating, I forget what they call them, but they haul small fuel wagons with diesel fuel or gasoline, something along that line, to keep resin warm. That being the case, the hazardous material would apply to, that would be a Class 3 hazmat for any container that holds more than 1,000 pounds. There's been some motor carrier issues I've been exposed to since being with CRM, where motor carriers have these on a trailer and they're completely empty. Even though they're empty, it's what's called it's what they can hold. So a perfect example on the next slide here, the average fuel wagon holds about 275 gallons of fuel oil. And when you take a look at the weight of the fuel oil being 6.7 pounds per gallon, that tank is capable of holding 1,842.5 pounds. So it's not what you're carrying, it's what you can be carrying. And keep in mind that at that weight, it becomes DOT regulated for hazardous material for requiring placards. And they require limited quantities to get too much on this. But some of the violations that fall under the hazmat are your bulk packaging offered without placards, meaning you're hauling that tank without having the placards on all 4 sides. Shipping papers offered exactly where they're supposed to be. They have to be within the reach of the driver while restrained in the seatbelt. A lot of people put them on the dashboard, and I can tell you that when I used to work at the roadside inspections, we used to see the shipping papers on a clipboard along with like a trip manifest. If the driver can't reach those shipping papers, then that vehicle is placed out of service, and it's called no shipping papers being offered. And even if he undoes his seatbelt, reaches up and grabs the shipping papers for that short period of time, as few seconds as it may, that becomes a hazardous material out of service violation. That being said, you get 2 of those in the course of a year, you will probably receive a warning letter from the FMCSA. Another one would be your emergency response guidebook, and the 2016 edition is the new edition. They update every 3-4 years, and the ERG has to be immediately available, and it has to be inside the vehicle. Emergency response information, there has to be a 1 sheet with the vehicle or the driver, listing at least 2 people who are in a management position with their names, titles, and phone numbers for 24-hour accessibility in the event of an emergency. And then improper blocking and bracing, which is securement, not general securement, but only specific to hazardous material, is the Achilles heel of most people falling above the national averages. As a company, it's extremely recommended that your blocking and bracing or securement standard should be zero tolerance whatsoever, meaning there should be absolutely no movement whatsoever of that, whatever it is that you're carrying that falls under hazardous material. Moving forward, driver fitness. Now, your driver fitness is strictly operation by drivers who are unfit to operate a motor vehicle. And what does that mean? Typically, it's your medical cards, your CDL without the proper classification, CDL A, B, or C. If you're operating a truck, van, or combination of truck and trailer, as soon as it exceeds 10,000 pounds, 10,001 pounds, you're required to have a DOT medical card on the driver. Now, having said that, the CSA program, as far as having the medical cards on the person, has changed back in 2014, where the driver no longer is required to keep the medical card on him, but must pre-register, what they call self-certify, with the state that they're associated with, state of New Hampshire, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and so on. And they have to do this each time that they renew their medical card. If they don't, then their CDL will be suspended, and it will be considered a driver fitness violation if they get stopped. Even if they produce the CDL in person, it's all what the motor vehicle holds it at. So they absolutely have to self-certify each time they renew their medical card. Medical cards expire every 2 years if you're in good shape, nice and young with no medical issues. If you have a diabetic issue, they'll break that down to an annual. If you have a sleep apnea issue, they'll break that down to 6 months. They qualify that as any driver who has a neck diameter of 17 inches or more, and they require sleep testing. It's a very costly effort. So the drivers to stay in shape clearly works to his benefit. Again, without a medical card, no hazmat endorsement, something like that falls under the driver fitness basic. The vehicle maintenance, that's what I call the big enchilada. The vehicle maintenance basic is failure to maintain your vehicle, or your commercial vehicle, properly. It also includes general securement, not blocking and bracing, for loads that shift, move, fall below from a vehicle. Good examples of this is your brakes, brake lights, mechanical defects, failure to maintain or repair improper load securement, and so on. I'll give you a breakdown on exactly what it is they're looking for and how many violations actually apply to this basic. Easiest way to maintain this basic in good order is to enforce, or whether it be through a progressive disciplinary process, but you need to ensure that your drivers are completing the 3-step in the DVIR process, which is the driver vehicle inspection report process. And a couple of years ago, through that MAP 21 program I told you about, the Fed eliminated the requirement for motor carriers to require their drivers to complete a written report, which again is done at the end of the day, not the beginning of the day. I highly recommend to motor carriers to make believe they never heard that, and to require your drivers to complete a daily DVIR, again, at the end of the day. The big thing is there are so many items on here that if you don't do it the same way, you're less likely to make a mistake. So if they follow this, I'd hate to see people get into the trap where they said, well, the truck was okay last night, it'll be okay today. And of course that's probably true. But when they're doing their pre-trip at the beginning of the day, you're really doing a vehicle overview. And as you're approaching your van, your truck, your trailer and truck, you're just walking around, see if there's anything hanging that wasn't hanging there the night before, or you may have missed puddles, which could be consistent with motor oil, differential fluid, antifreeze, brake fluid, anything like that, which could be a real issue. Then they get into the vehicle, then we'll talk about the brake test and so on. But these are important, and they also hold the driver's feet to the fire, so to speak, because this is documentation that the driver's signing off on that he did a proper pre-trip prior to moving forward. So all items within the vehicle maintenance basic that's used by the DOT. Every one of these violations should be identified during a pre-trip inspection. Now, I've been driving tractor trailers since I was in the Marine Corps back in the 70s, and I will tell you, it's physiologically impossible to catch everything. But you sure got to give it your due diligence. A lot of times the chafed air hoses and lines for air brakes are extremely difficult to locate. And pulling into some of the roadside inspections in Connecticut, they actually have a contraption called a pit, and the vehicle goes over the top of the pit, and the inspector or the trooper goes down inside the thing with a stethoscope, and he can touch things that you probably don't even realize are on the truck. But unfortunately, that's the name of the game. They take it very seriously, and anything that falls within the failure to do a proper pre-trip, which is what one of the violations is, the driver is faulted for failure to do a proper pre-trip. Unfortunately, the motor carrier is also faulted, and it falls on your motor carrier safe SMS scores. So as the driver receives penalty points, so doesn't the motor carrier, which strengthens the need for driver training. We provide that here at CRM. I do that for carriers all over the place. And it's just at the beginning of the year, it's nice to have a refresher. We just go through the general steps in the pre and post trip, as well as the other vehicle basics that are involved here. The tough thing is, as you can see in smaller print, these can prompt a training audit inspection with the Fed. And once that happens, if they find multiple violations showing a pattern on the DVIRs being completed, then the motor carrier becomes faulted for failure to train, and that's another whole issue. Moving forward, your basic score improvements start again with the DVIR. I'm going to beat this horse to death. It's one of the most it's the most effective step in lowering your vehicle maintenance basic. Again, your DVIR, your driver vehicle inspection report, is extremely critical in identifying potential safety hazards before they're documented and found as a violation of a roadside inspection. So again, I mentioned that the progressive disciplinary process, it strictly can apply here if a driver is found consistently missing items that he should know about, then we have to make that progressive disciplinary program can fall into play. And it's also incumbent upon the motor carrier to properly train these drivers in order to accomplish this. The whole point behind completing this thing, the DVIR, is the driver again is stating officially that he is satisfied that the equipment is in good working order, or that the equipment must be repaired before being used again. So having said that, if he completes a DVIR at the end of the day, whether he's required to or not, if he finds a defect on the vehicle, that DVIR must be completed and submitted to management or whomever you designate to receive these in order for that to be repaired. There's a huge liability issue at place here, where if a driver does identify a defect with the vehicle and it's taken out again by either a second driver or himself, or the motor carrier just doesn't fix it for whatever reason, then this can prompt a compliance review, and they're looking for consistencies. And what they'll do is they'll take, I do compliance reviews for CRM. I did them when I was on the job, and they take a look at 6 months of driver daily logs, and of course that's changing with the electronic log devices, and 90 days of DVIRs. If the trooper or FMCSA special agent asks you for 6 months of DVIRs, you hand him 90 days. He knows that. And what happens is if he gives you you give him 60 months or 6 months worth of DVIRs, anything that he finds on what you give him is fair game. So you don't want to hit him with, you don't want to hand them a loaded magazine, so to speak, to use against you. It's just don't. 6 months for driver daily logs, 90 days for DVIRs. That's all you're required to retain these for. Now, it's obvious that these items need to be in good working order to ensure a safe operation of the commercial motor vehicle. The driver should never take equipment on the road until this process is accurately completed. The general categories include, but not limited to, service brakes, parking brakes, cab brakes, trailer brakes, any trailer over 4,000 pounds. That could include surge brakes, hydraulic brakes, again, air brakes, and these guys have got to know how to properly test them. You might sit there and say, oh, what's to a brake? What's to a brake? It's no big deal. It is a big deal, especially when you're being asked to perform the brake test that you did on your pre-trip at the beginning of the day, and the trooper looks at you and says, what's the matter? And then all of a sudden the driver is lost for words because he didn't check them. That's not good. Again, your hand parking brakes, your steering mechanism, there's all kinds of issues with steering mechanisms that we teach during our regular class, but the steering mechanism, your steering yoke, your commercial vehicle steering wheel can't have more than 10 degrees more steering lash, which is side to side, your steering knuckle, tie rods, all types of items that are within the truck's contents under the hood that need to be checked out. I call it push and pull. If something twists and turns and you push and pull it, it's got a little movement to it, then you have an issue with your steering mechanism. Lighting defects and reflectors are a big deal. There are certain lights that you really wouldn't think about, but they're actually considered out of service criteria for them failing. A turn signal inoperative is an out of service violation. It would have to be fixed prior to the vehicle leaving. Low beams at night. It's the definition of an out of service criteria violation is any defect that could adversely affect the vehicle's operation and likely to cause a vehicle breakdown or an accident. And you sit there and think about that for a second. How can a tail light or a turn signal cause an accident? Well, if you're intending to turn right or turn left and the person behind you doesn't know you're turning left or right because your turn signal's not working, then you could potentially have an issue. And that's how this is all looked at. Tires, again, your tires, 230 seconds on your steering axle, 430 seconds on all other axles. For a commercial vehicle, for your average non-commercial, it's 2 and 2, 230 seconds all the way around. If you're hauling hazardous material, if you're pulling a trailer, hauling one of those fuel tanks that we looked at earlier, it's 430 seconds on the steering axle and 230 seconds on all other axles. It's actually doubled on your steering axle. So it's that important. And they'll go right up. The guys will go right up with the tread depth gauge. A lot of times we used to use a meter that judges the heat in the steering hub near the tires. And what they're doing is the heat index that's shown on the screen will give a degree reading on how hot the brakes are. And if you have 3 brakes that are 190 degrees after coming to a stop, all of a sudden you have one that's 50, you have a brake failure or a issue with that brake, and they'll break it down and do a level 1 comprehensive vehicle inspection and identify why the brake temperature difference is what it is. Horns, you may have 2. You may have an air horn and a city horn. If they have 2, they both must be working. You actually just got to tap it a couple of times. Your windshield wipers, washer and defroster. Your windshield wipers, we'll talk about that real quickly here. They have to be functional. Issue with the windshield, windshield itself is any damage to a windshield, A-pillar to A-pillar or side to side, any damage whatsoever to that windshield can be a violation. Out of service criteria violations fall within 2 inches from the top of the windshield to the top of the steering wheel, wherever the driver may have it. And typically what we do is we just tell people that it's within the swipe of the windshield wiper. So what kind of damage would be considered an out of service violation for a windshield? It would be any crack that's thicker than 1/4 of an inch, and that's a pretty thick crack. Any crack longer than 3 inches. Any damage within that criteria, within that swipe of the wiper that intersects with any other damage. So if you have one little damage and another little damage, but they intersect, that's an out of service violation. And when you look at the bowl, they call them what, the bowl holes, rock chip, and you'll have that little bowl hole right somewhere within the swipe of that wiper. And if the circumference of that is more than 3/4 of an inch, which is actually the diameter of a nickel, then that becomes an instant out of service violation. Now these can absolutely be filled. If you have a contract with a glass mirror and glass people that can fill these things and repair them, it's a good idea. And I understand that these things can happen while you're on the road too. And the driver's typically going to say, and I've heard this so many hundreds of times, well, it wasn't that way when I left. Okay, well, it is that way now, and unfortunately, now is the time. It's happening in real time. That needs to be repaired. So much with that. Rear vision mirrors have to be clear. If you're in the snowstorm, we try to be as respectful to the driver relative to bad weather as you can, but the mirrors have got to be clear. A lot of the trucks have heated mirrors. That helps out a great deal during your foggy conditions and heat indexes that go from humidity to less humid. They can actually fog up that way, but they have to be clear. Coupling devices, which would be everything from a fifth wheel to a pintle hook that you may use for a trailer to any type of a hook. Massachusetts and Connecticut, Vermont require the safety chains to physically be crossed. They have to be able to look at it, and we'll be talking about visual violations in a moment, but just keep that thought in mind. And emergency equipment. Start right off the bat with fire extinguishers. But for a commercial vehicle not hauling hazardous material, you must have at least a 5-pound BC extinguisher on board. You can carry 2 4-pounds, but it just doesn't make sense. A 5-pounder is much easier to access. And speaking of access, it has to be readily available and secure. Now, readily available means you can't have to go fishing through it, even though you know exactly where it is. If you have to remove a bunch of clothes or a spare tire or anything, a seismograph, that's hiding that from you being able to readily gain accessible to it. It becomes non-accessible, and it's also a violation under this basic, under the maintenance basic. They have to be inspected once a month. You're looking at the green arrow to be right in the green part of the gauge. If it's above or below it, it needs to be replaced or looked at by a fire extinguisher inspection company. They're all over the place. You're looking at the foot ring. You're looking at the head ring. You're looking for any pitting. That could be an issue. There should be a tag on it. It can be either aluminum or like a hard cardboard type. And you're on the back side of that, you have 12 months. The inspector who looks at it, the driver who looks at it, signs off on it, or somebody looks at it, signs off, puts his initials down on it, and the date it was done. Those need to be done at least once a month. At the end of the year, they should be replaced or have been inspected by whatever fire extinguisher company that you see fit to do these. Very inexpensive, but it could be expensive in the event that they fail at the wrong time. They can be on the outside of the vehicle. Some companies decide to put them on the outside of a box truck. Explosive trucks often have them on the back of the magazines that haul explosives. And the hazardous material fire extinguishers has to be at least a 10 BC and also needs to be readily accessible. So for non-hazmat, it's 5. For hazardous materials transports, it is 10 or higher. So again, now your DVIR is completed at the end of the day. This is a misconception by a lot of drivers. When I do compliance reviews for a company, one of the first things I notice is, and it's very typical, it's just because of lack of training, is that the driver vehicle inspection report has to be at the end of the day. So what they do is you have your AM and PM lines on the right-hand side of a DVIR, and the guys typically write in the time that they did their inspection in the morning. That's called a form of manner violation, because if you look at the very back page of the book, in the back it tells you how and where to make entries on that, and it states that the written report is the post-trip inspection report, not the pre-trip. You can do a written pre-trip, but please be careful not to sign it. What happens is if you do a pre-trip and you do it at 6 a.m. and then you sign it that you've done it, that's telling me at a roadside inspection, you're telling the trooper that your day ended at 6 o'clock in the morning, because that's when it's required to be done. And what they'll do is they'll write that up as improper DVIR, and again, that's a form of manner violation. and that falls under the vehicle maintenance basic. I mentioned before due diligence. If the driver really does do his best, the inspector is going to be able to tell the condition of the truck, how many violations he finds, the severity of the violations he finds, and whether or not he believes that the proper DVIR was done. One of the classes I teach here is how to survive a roadside inspection, and it's only about a half-hour long, but it identifies and puts point on each one of these items here, and I don't have time to get into it right now any further than what we already are. But again, your driver that completes the DVIR, it's simply preventing any unsafe operation of the vehicle, and it will lessen the chances of violations being charged to the carrier and the driver caused by their basic score to rise. So the CBSA Service Inspection Vehicle, as I mentioned before, CBSA stands for Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. This is a North America alliance that's based out of DC. It includes Mexico and Canada. These people are the powers to be for all of the roadside inspections that take place, even on a state level. They're based on the North American Out of Service Criteria standard. You can go online and actually you can print it if you want to. The 2017 book I know is on the CBSA website. It's lengthy, but it's a good idea to have available at least for somebody to look at it at a common area where drivers collect, and they can just take a look at some of the CBSA out of service criteria issues that are out there. And as I mentioned before, your out of service is any reason or any condition, including loading, that would be likely to cause an accident or vehicle breakdown. During some of these classes, I explained the situation that I got involved with on the Mass Turnpike, and there was a tractor trailer out of New Hampshire that was hauling meat coming onto Route 290, and they were, I take that back, coming from 290 onto the Mass Pike, and it's a very hairpin turn heading south, and a strap had broke, and the driver had failed to notice that the strap had frayed, and the working load limit was less than 50% of what the meat was. It broke and slammed against the side of the trailer, rolled the truck over at the exact same time that a VW Bug was crossing the path of the tractor. And I got called to Massachusetts because their TAR unit, the Technical Accident Reconstruction Unit, were all involved in something else. And needless to say, that's a vehicle inspection issue. These drivers have got to be cognizant of their securement devices. Now, these guys have got to understand how to test the vehicle brake, whether it be mechanical or air brakes. As I mentioned before, one of the 32 steps that an inspector will ask during a level 1 inspection, the comprehensive inspection, is did you test your brakes? And each inspector asks the same question the same way, and the driver's going to say, of course, yes, of course I did. And he says, okay, you have hydraulic brakes. How do you test them? Do it for me. Same thing would apply for air brakes. And there's quite a process in testing the air brakes. I won't get into it now. But when the driver, if he has a vehicle that's a license that allows him to drive a vehicle equipped with air brakes, then he already knows or knew when he did his test how to do it. And that's what we think at the roadsides. And we have that frame of mind that if you knew it once, how come you don't know it now? So it's just something that needs to be done. It's important that they know this. I mentioned that the vehicle maintenance basic was the big enchilada. This basic has 235 individual violations that fall within that basic. It's hard to even comprehend that. It falls into everything from marker lights being out, vehicle reflective sheeting on trucks that require, again, securement issues. A whole realm of violations fall under the vehicle maintenance basic. And of course, this is where most, I hate saying all of them for sure, but most big violation issues for motor carrier fall into play here. And it's so easy to fall prey to a roadside inspection for something maintenance. I'll give you an example real quick. Any box truck, tractor trailer are required to have certain marker lights at certain locations. Some of them are LED lights. The LED lights have a tendency to corrode at the ground point underneath the mounting, and typically you can see one flashing when you're driving down the road, and that's PC or probable cause to stop the vehicle. That one marker light would be considered a warning against the driver, just a little marker light. So that's how important the vehicle maintenance basic is. Now, this is something that I stress as hard as I can. And in 2015, 37% of all out-of-service violations in North America began with an on-road traffic violation or a vehicle defect observed by a law enforcement official. Anybody can stop any of your trucks for any of the reasons that fall within DOT. It's just the fact that a lot of local departments and sheriffs aren't trained in these regulations. Some of us would rather watch paint dry. Some of us would rather chase bank robbers. But that's really where this falls. So you think about that. 37 out of every 100 out-of-service violations began because the driver was speeding, tailgating, unsafe lane changes, headlight out, tail light out, marker lights out. All these little things are probable cause to stop a vehicle. Now, if you work for the state or the FMCSA and you're qualified to do truck inspections, now you're on the side of the road and you fall prey to any one of 6 CBSA level inspections. Anything that happens subsequent to that stop is fair game for the trooper or the special agent that made the vehicle stop. So you feel kind of stupid when you have to come up and call your boss and tell him you're in a roadside inspection and you get placed out of service because you have an issue out that you can't fix yourself, and now you can't make it to your timely delivery. Your truck's on the side of the road. Now your company has to find a guy to come out and tow your truck up. It's ridiculous. It's costly. That's the right word to say. And it's tough because when you have time deliveries that need you to be there at a certain time, and all of a sudden you can't because you missed something on your pre-trip, that's how important this stuff comes into play. So keep that thought in mind. If the guys are out there speeding and they get stopped, they could be subject to a roadside inspection on the spot. Anything that happens from that point forward is fair game. Now, we talked about securement. There are specific requirements that a lot of the drivers completely blow off just because. Most of the time is because they're lazy, and laziness is contagious. It's terrible. And once the driver's on the road, he's required to check his securement devices and tires at a specific interval. And what most of the guys don't do is they fail to check their cargo securement devices within the first 50 miles. Now that can be anywhere from pulling out on the road, from leaving your terminal to someplace on the road, someplace within that 50 miles that he can stop for just a couple of minutes and just make sure that his tie-down securement devices, chains, straps are still secure or haven't moved, or your cargo hasn't moved. Now after that, they have to check their securement devices after traveling for 3 hours or 150 miles, whichever comes first. So you have there's actually 3 times. You have within your first 50 miles. Each time you exit your vehicle, you're supposed to do a quick walk around and make sure your tires are in good shape. You don't have any rocks between your dualies. If you have underinflated dually tires, they have a tendency to touch each other, and rubber creates heat. Heat creates fire, and that's not good. So that's really the mainframe behind this whole thing. And then again, every 3 hours, 150 miles, whichever comes first. So the bottom line, folks, is that your drivers, they have their very own CDL motor vehicle record. And if they don't have a CDL, because they're not driving a commercial vehicle requiring a CDL, they still have a commercial vehicle safety score above and beyond their regular motor vehicle history for driving a motorcycle, a car, boat, plane, that type of thing. Again, every violation from a warning to your out-of-service violations are the drivers for 36 months, and the motor carrier carries that for 24 months. And the tough thing is, you as a motor carrier, you employ several people that operate these vehicles, whether it's a van hauling a trailer, a pickup truck, an F-150 that hooks onto a compressor or a generator. All of a sudden, you're over the 10,000-pound mark. you fall under this criteria. So I mentioned the DOT compliance issues, excuse me, the warning letters, and what happens as a follow-up to some of these bad scores. And a DOT safety or compliance audit, I have sat through 3 of them on your side of the table in my position here, assisting a motor carrier, and obviously I've done endless numbers of them in the field on the other side. And these can take anywhere from 3 days to as many as 9. I say 9 because that was the lengthiest one that I was involved with representing a motor carrier. And it's only because every time the special agent from DOT looked at something, he found another issue, and it became a trend. And the carrier just wasn't doing what they were supposed to be doing, and he just kept going and going and going and going. And the tough thing, I mean, the penalties have hellacious fines associated with them, and hopefully none of them are criminal. But just out-of-service violations that show a pattern can rise to as much as $11,000 per violation. So when you come up with some issues where carriers aren't auditing, self-auditing some of these records to look for these issues, and they just keep missing them, now there's a liability issue there, and the vicarious liability to the motor carrier is huge. And that's that would be, keep it in a nutshell, that would be the motor carrier being aware of an issue or a problem and not taking a positive step to correct it. The warning letter, this will typically come with 2 of the 7 basics falling above the national average, or national averages, and they'll send it to the primary place of business the motor carrier identifies on his MCS 150 form, and it outlines possible consequences of continued safety problems. What it does do, though, it provides you, the carrier, with instructions for accessing your safety data, which I gave you at the beginning of this presentation, and how to identify or come up with ways of a safety management controls, how you're going to make it better and see that it doesn't happen again. The next one would be targeted road inspections, and that would be your truck pulls into a roadside inspection. What happens is the trooper or the agent plugs your DOT number into a laptop real quick, and believe it or not, it's a system of green, red, or amber. And if they're not too busy and they get an amber, that means they're going to pull you over a little bit, and the computer's going to identify the safety issues that created this particular roadside inspection, and it's targeting the motor carrier or the company for issues that happen on the roads. And if it's not too serious, like he has some inspection issues with like your lights, things like that, and they're really busy, they may talk to you to tell you, you got to do the X, Y, and Z. But that's the second. That would be the second level. Your off-site focused inspection is a record request, and the Fed will send you a letter requiring you to fax, either fax or send hard copies to either your local FMCSA office or to the DC office. And what happens is, depending on the documents, you could be subject to an on-site, which we'll get to that in a moment, investigation. These records, if you don't provide them, they will be subpoenaed by the Fed, and that can be pretty uncomfortable. If that does happen, your review typically will change to an on-site review. And that's when you get a knock on your front door. It is completely unannounced, and they'll appear on your site, again, at your primary place of business, which is where you need to keep your records. And they're looking for your carrier's performance records, any deficiencies that are happening. An on-site focused investigation may be selected when the carrier is found to be deficient, again, in two or more basics that fall above the national averages. Then you would have your comprehensive review, which is the big one, and this is where motor carriers have all kinds of issues. And if you go on the FMCSA website, they can actually provide you with examples of companies by state which have been put on suspension or completely had their DOT number suspended or revoked, and they provide reasons why. kind of investigating. Kind of embarrassing. And it's conducted by safety investigators, again, at the place of business. And it's not merely those items that have been identified, but they dig into your hours of service. They'll actually do what's called a level 5 inspection on site of one of your trucks. They're looking at your drug and alcohol records, looking at pre-trip inspections, driver daily logs, your applications, your DOT driver qualification files are reviewed, and typically they'll go through 10% of your gross volume of drivers and records. That's usually the average. This will typically happen when you have a consistently bad basics that pop up, multi-deficient basics, which are 3 or more, if you're involved with a fatality or a complaint of reckless driving or something along that line. If you have a fatality involved, this is automatic. It will happen. Some of these will give you a 48-hour notice that they're typically coming, only because you as a carrier have 48 hours to produce any records on demand. So what they usually do is provide you with an email on a Friday afternoon and say we'll be there at 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday. And you have the whole weekend to come up and bring everything up that they're telling you you need. So needless to say, all this can be prevented by the motor carrier and the driver doing the right things because it's the right thing to do. It's just a little extra time. In 1963, John F. Kennedy made the quote, "A rising tide lifts all boats." And the boats are everything around your company. And if you have a safety culture of doing the right things the way they're supposed to be done, that rising tide lifts your whole company up to a level of compliance. It's really, really that simple. And to take a positive mental attitude effect towards this, being proactive than inactive, everything can change for you in a positive way. So in summary, folks, is your drivers are the front lines of your company. And your actions or inactions can determine the future of your company. And again, the do it right attitude is everything. So again, folks, my name is Bruce Lawler with Contractors Risk Management. I head the DOT Compliance and Training Division here. The phone number here is area code 603-225-3335. And my email address is blawler, BLAWLER, @crmusa.com. And Patsy, that's all I have for you.
Thanks, Bruce. I'm going to open it up. If anybody has any questions or anything, please feel free to ask, or you can write them in the question box and Bruce can answer them. We can stay on for a few more minutes. I'm new to everybody. Anyone any questions?